We now know about one potential Supreme Court replacement President Biden is seriously considering. The White House confirmed South Carolina federal judge Michelle Childs is on the short list. Last year, Mr. Biden nominated the 55-year-old to serve on the U.S. Court of Appeals for D.C., one of the most prominent federal courts. Whomever President Biden ultimately picks will take the seat of Justice Stephen Breyer. The 83-year-old and oldest member of the High Court says he will step down at the end of this term, so long as his successor is confirmed before then. For more on all this, I want to bring in Sean Sullivan. He's a CBS News political contributor and White House reporter for The Washington Post. Sean, tell us, what more do we know about Child's background, and why has she emerged as a top contender?
Well, Lana, Judge Childs is from South Carolina. She is a federal judge. And one notable point about her is that she has a pretty prominent backer, somebody who's really advocating for her publicly. And that's Congressman Jim Clyburn, the majority whip in the House and a very, very close ally of President Biden. Congressman Clyburn was an early, crucial supporter of Biden when he ran for president. His campaign in the Democratic primary was struggling at a point. Congressman Clyburn endorsed him, and that helped him turn his campaign around. And ever since, Congressman Clyburn's views have been taken very, very seriously by the president, by his top advisors. So to have somebody as prominent and as influential as Jim Clyburn out there publicly promoting Judge Childs is certainly notable at this point. It is also notable, as you mentioned, Lana, that the White House publicly confirmed that she is one of the people that is under consideration. You tend to see presidents and White Houses be very sort of secretive about who exactly they are talking to, thinking about, vetting, going through the biographies and resumes. And so this was the first time that the White House publicly and on the record said, look, here's somebody that we're considering. But at the same time, we get the impression in our reporting that she's not the only one, that there are others being considered. And so there's certainly a lot of things that the White House is going to have to consider in the months ahead, or I should say in the weeks ahead, actually, given the time frame that they appear to want to move on. But certainly having somebody like Congressman Clyburn speak out publicly about Judge Childs, I think it's something that has caught this White House's attention and is prompting them, at least in part, to take a close look at her qualifications.
Absolutely. I remember during the electoral process when we were talking about how important and crucial Clyburn's endorsement was of then candidate Biden. But Sean, you mentioned that there are other people who are also in contention, and you have new reporting on this nomination process. Tell us what you know about how the White House and outside groups have been strategizing for this moment.
Well, they want to move quickly, and what we've seen in the past few days from President Biden, from his top aides, are basically signals that this is going to be a pretty swift moving process. The president a few days ago said that he wants to nominate a Black woman for the Supreme Court by the end of February. And what we also know is that this is not a process that is just now starting from scratch after Justice Breyer announced his retirement. We know that the president and his aides have already been considering biographies, have already sort of had some potential candidates in their minds. The White House has already designated a small group of people who are going to sort of be the point people that President Biden consults and is advised by in this process. Vice President Harris is one of those people, according to the White House. And so this is a process that looks like in some ways is already underway and is moving very, very quickly. I think the White House does not want to have a slow process. We have a 50-50 Senate right now, 50 Democrats, 50 Republicans. It's a pretty fragile state of affairs right there. So I think the White House wants to move quickly as possible in this case. And it looks like it's going to be a matter of weeks, not months, before we ultimately figure out who this person is that the president puts forward.
So on that point, Sean, Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer pledged a confirmation process that would move very quickly. But we know that the confirmation process in recent years has become more political. And we also know how the Senate has derailed several of President Biden's plans. So is there preparation being made right now for potential setbacks in the Senate, like the ones that stalled his legislative agenda?
Yeah, that's a really important point, Lana, to consider as we move forward here, because even though Democrats control the Senate. I mean, it's a 50-50 Senate, but Vice President Harris can break ties. It's been difficult at times for President Biden to move his agenda forward. Not only has he faced resistance from Republicans, he's faced resistance from Democrats. Senator Joe Manchin is one who has resisted his agenda, has made things really, really hard for the White House. So I think right now the White House and Senate Democratic leadership have already started to think about what some of these roadblocks might be, what some of these obstacles might be that they're going to have to overcome. The good news for the White House in this case is that when you look at somebody like Senator Manchin, who has been difficult at times to work with from the White House's perspective when it comes to their legislative agenda, on the issue of judges, he's been a pretty staunch supporter of President Biden. So I think that's one thing that gives Democrats some degree of confidence in this case. And then there are also a handful of Republicans that might be gettable in terms of a vote. You look at somebody like Senator Susan Collins, a moderate centrist Republican from Maine who has a track record of confirming Supreme Court justices submitted by both Democratic presidents and Republican presidents. And so there's still a possibility that President Biden might be able to get some Republican support in this case. But I think a lot of Democrats look at the last year, they look at the twists and turns and surprises and the things that they haven't been able to do. And, I think they're nervous. I think they're worried. The sort of sense that I get from the last few days is optimism, but, very, very cautious optimism, knowing that there are a number of pitfalls that could stand in the way of Biden getting a smooth nomination and confirmation here. So a lot to watch, I think, in the weeks ahead.
Well, Sean, before I let you go, you were actually with the president in Pittsburgh yesterday while he toured damage from the bridge collapse. He also spoke on the supply chain, job creation, and his infrastructure deal. Tell us, how were his remarks and visit to the bridge received?
Well, it's interesting. The president had planned to go to Pittsburgh to tout his economic agenda, to talk about this infrastructure law that he had signed last year. And then yesterday morning, this news broke that this bridge had collapsed. There was some uncertainty in the early morning hours about, what the president would do, whether he would change his plans. The White House quickly came out and said, look, we're not going to change plans. In fact, I was on the plane with the president yesterday, and there was some, uncertainty about whether he would go to this bridge site. Got off of Air Force One, and I asked him if he planned to go visit this bridge. He indicated that he did plan to do that, and so we immediately went there. He got to see the damage up close, which was quite, striking to see just how much damage this bridge had sustained. When I was there, you could still smell natural gas in the air, and it was something that he referenced in his remarks later in the day when he talked about his infrastructure plan. So in a way, this was, a sort of a moment where the president tried to say, hey, look, this is precisely why we need to restore our nation's infrastructure. But at the same time, I think yesterday was a reminder that it's going to take time to repair many of the bridges, many of the roads around the country that need repairs. Not all of this infrastructure plan is something that can be implemented quickly. And so the question is, are we going to see other malfunctions? Are we going to see other collapses around the country? I think nobody wants to see that, but it could be time, potentially years, before the government is able to fully address a lot of these needs.
Yeah, and that particular bridge was only 50 years old, really concerning. All right, Sean, thank you.
Thanks.